Hello everyone. This is version 1.3 of the shader update. This time, I added a few user-requested features, and I also reorganized the parameters to make navigation easier. This update includes tinted shadow penumbra, emissive response to directional light intensity, a few diffuse tinting settings, and a full parameter cleanup for better clarity. Let's start with shadow penumbra in the materials. Penumbra is the soft transition area between the fully shadowed region and the lit area. Here, I added the ability to tint that transition color. This effect has been added to the materials listed here. As with other parts of the shader, how you apply color depends on how your base color is set up. If you are using only a base color or a single color texture, you will have one color parameter along with a power control. The color parameter tints the affected area, and the power control makes the effect stronger and sharper. If you use an RGBA masking setup, each enabled channel gets its own penumbra color and power control. You can also turn the effect on or off entirely if you do not want to use it. Since penumbra appears between the shadowed and lit areas, smoothing the shadow will increase or reduce the affected area. I think penumbra adds a nice touch to surfaces like skin, but overall, it also gives the model a small but noticeable polish. For world lighting, the implementation was a little more complicated. The most stable solution seemed to be modifying the engine shader code directly, but that would have affected all projects using the same engine. After testing a few options, I came up with a workaround and added penumbra parameters directly in the engine settings. You can adjust them there as needed, but there will be no live viewport update because the engine shader has to compile after the values change. To apply the change, go to the tool menu and use the apply option. This should add penumbra color to your shadows, as long as there is a visible transition between light and shadow. You can adjust that transition scale using the source angle parameter on the directional light. If you like the result, save the settings using the Save button in the tool menu. This will ensure that the correct penumbra settings are applied when the engine starts. Behind the scenes, the tool backs up the original shader file and applies the changes separately, so you can always go back to the original file if you no longer want the effect. I still recommend making a manual backup of deferred light pixel shaders.usf, just in case something goes wrong. That way, you will not need to reinstall the engine. Since editing the core shader file affects other projects that use the same engine, I needed a safer workaround. So I placed the tool files in all affected projects in a disabled state. When a project starts, it checks the penumbra settings you applied in the engine settings and enables or disables the effect accordingly. In other words, it should turn itself on and off based on your settings. If the files are not present in a project, it may look different from how it should. If I find a better solution, I will include it in a future update. But for now, I think this is a workable way to handle it. To make this work in this project, I already placed the necessary files in the project folder. For your other projects, the zip file also includes those files separately. Just open your project folder and paste the content and saved folders from the zip into it. The second addition to the shader is related to the fact that the material is mostly emissive. Previously, when the light intensity was reduced, the surface was still staying lit. This has now been updated so that the material gradually darkens as the directional light intensity decreases below 1. At an intensity of 0, the material will fade completely to black. There is nothing to set up in the material itself. However, to activate this effect, at least one mesh using a material that references the shader's material parameter collection needs to be placed in a blueprint using the BP Character Master parent class, which is an updated version of the blueprint that was previously integrated in an earlier update. This is because the parameter collection is initialized from the blueprint and then shared by all materials using it. The mesh itself does not need to be your character. Any mesh using a shader with that parameter collection can activate the effect for the other assets in the scene. The third adjustment is simple but useful. I added tinting parameters for the diffuse map. Like in some other parts of the shader, you can control the amount of darkening and tinting through a parameter. This helps avoid issues where darker colors do not tint correctly. You will also notice a new parameter that you have not seen elsewhere in the shader: tint strength. This blends between the tinted color and the original color. Under the hood, I used a different approach to help preserve the original lighting of the texture while still applying the tint. A standard multiply with a flat color can often make the result feel too dark, and depending on the underneath color, it may not tint correctly. So I created a slightly more advanced method to get better results while preserving the original look of the texture. Next, we have the parameters organization. This part may not look dramatic at first, but it was probably the most time-consuming change. I was reusing the same parameters and switches in multiple parts of the shader, and that made adjustments messy. So I centralized the parts that could be shared, which should make future updates much easier. Because most parameter names did not change, your current settings should still work after the update. There is only one exception: a switch in the outlines. The outlines and the other materials are using the same color system, making it easy to copy and paste between the materials. However, the outlines previously had a separate color switch name, which I renamed to match the other materials. This keeps the naming consistent and ensures that copying and pasting values between materials works correctly. The outlines color switches may appear off when you start the project, like it was the case when I updated the shaders in an earlier clip. The other settings should have kept their input color, so you will just need to turn that switch back on to get the correct color back. In the Material Instance UI, you may have noticed the emojis. I discovered that it was possible to add them, and I thought they would make the menus faster and easier to identify. A lot of the emojis I tried did not work, but I did my best to find the right ones for each section. The organization itself also changed. Previously, too many parameters were grouped together in the color section, which could become confusing, especially when using RGBA masks and multiple ways of painting each mask. The old ordering also made it difficult to insert new sections in the right place, so I changed the numbering system, which allows me to place new sections underneath existing ones when needed. This is how I was able to build the color section more cleanly. Most of the color-related settings in the shader are now grouped near the top. I also separated the main color switches into their own submenu. The settings that control the actual effects, like subsurface scattering, keep their own submenus. However, their color settings have been moved next to the other color controls at the top. I had to adjust a lot of connections to make this work properly. From what I have checked so far, everything seems fine and nothing appears to be broken. But if you notice anything that feels misplaced, or anything that does not respond correctly, please let me know. If you already have the project and want to update to this version, I strongly recommend making a backup before doing anything else. For this update, I adjusted most of the materials and added new functions, so updating the resource folder, as shown earlier, will be essential. The art and levels folders are optional, but you can update them if you want to see the new Penumbra settings applied to my assets. And as I mentioned earlier, after updating, the outline color switch will most likely be disabled. Turning it back on will restore the original color if it was enabled before. To be able to apply the Penumbra color to the world, copy the saved and content folders into your project. I think that covers this update. I saw the Unreal Engine 5.8 release, but I will wait before updating this project. I want to add a few more things and make sure everything is stable before moving to another version. I already have a few ideas lined up for the shader. I also plan to keep considering user requests like the ones in this update, and I will do my best to implement them. Thank you for watching.